Hello, and welcome to the Chamber's Expert Focus Weil Tax Insight Series. My name is Devon Bodoh, and I lead the international tax practice at Weil. With me today is Joe Pari, who leads our tax practice. We're going to talk a little bit about the current state of spin-offs and what's happening there, whether it be the current state of leverage and how you allocate debt and cash between a company that's distributing a SpinCo and SpinCo. We'll move into a little bit about the ruling process in the US and how that is developed and contoured over time. And we'll wrap it up with a few hot issues in the cross-border area. Joe, do you want to take us through the first piece on the current state of leverage and what we're seeing in the market?
Absolutely. Thanks, Devon. So leverage and getting an appropriate capital structure for the parent and the SpinCo is one of the most important goals in a typical spinoff. At the same time, the parent corporation is often interested in extracting as much value as possible out of the SpinCo in a tax-efficient manner. And what that involves is the parent allocating some portion of its debt to the SpinCo. And the most straightforward way for the parent to allocate some of its debt to the SpinCo is either to cause the SpinCo to borrow, distribute cash to the parent, and the parent use that cash to repay its own debt, or the parent substitutes some of its debt for assumable debt and causes the SpinCo to assume some of the parent debt. Both of those structures have limitations in that to do it in a tax-free transaction, the amount of leverage that the parent can put on the SpinCo is typically limited to the parent's basis in the SpinCo stock or assets, as the case may be. And consequently, the most straightforward way is often only part of the story when it comes to how the parent causes the SpinCo to lever. More exotic structures involve the SpinCo issuing what tax people refer to as securities, long-term debt with, say, a 7 to 10-year maturity, to the parent corporation, and having the parent use that SpinCo debt to repay parent debt. Now, it's difficult for the parent to go out to its creditors and get them to agree to accept SpinCo debt in exchange for parent debt when they thought they were going to be paid in cash. And consequently, the IRS, in recognition of the fact that it's important to allocate leverage between the parent and the SpinCo, yet the transaction structures that were available were cumbersome. The IRS has generally said that a taxpayer can go in for a ruling and issue new debt to an investment bank with the expectation that that new parent debt is going to be repaid with securities issued by the SpinCo. And the IRS has flip-flopped over the years about whether the parent could issue new debt for the purpose of having it repaid with SpinCo debt in connection with a spinoff. Right now, the climate is very favorable for those transactions, and they're much easier to implement than the deals that were historically done where parent creditors typically sold their debt to an investment bank that would then engage in an exchange with the parent and take SpinCo debt. Those transactions are not limited in the context of a tax-free transaction to the tax basis in the subsidiary. So that's a transaction where the parent can allocate debt to the subsidiary in excess of the subsidiary's tax basis. That's a fantastic transaction because it's almost impossible under US tax system to put leverage on an entity in excess of its tax basis and not recognize taxable gain. So this is a very important tool. As if that weren't enough, the spin-off rules continue to exhibit their flexibility by permitting the parent to use some of the SpinCo stock to repay parent debt. And historically, one of the business purposes that motivated spin-offs was to have a SpinCo issue its own stock in an IPO, say 20% of its stock, and then the parent would spin off 80% because investment bankers would say that the stock would trade better if 100% of the SpinCo stock was traded as opposed to only 20%, and the realized value would be greater. However, there was an IPO discount associated with those transactions because the SpinCo stock hadn't traded before. So people started employing a different mechanism in connection with spinoffs. They did all the leverage techniques that I talked about, but also had the parent retain, say, 20% of the stock of the SpinCo for use to repay parent debt. And again, that can be new parent debt, provided it is done right. These transactions, there's a right way and a wrong way to do them. If they're done wrong, it's Armageddon. If they're done properly, it's tax-free. But again, so now the parent can put liabilities on the SpinCo in excess of the basis of the SpinCo and use some portion of the SpinCo stock to repay parent debt. Incredibly powerful, because that SpinCo stock typically has little or no tax basis in the hands of parent. And if a corporation uses an appreciated asset to repay debt, it's typically taxable in that transaction, and it recognizes full gain with respect to the asset. This is a transaction that can be done in a totally tax-free manner. So it permits the parent to delever in a significant manner in a tax-free transaction. Hugely powerful deal. And Devon, I don't know if you'd like to talk a little bit about ruling versus opinion in this context.
Right. I think it's even broader, Joe. It really is a ruling versus an opinion. When we look at retained stock deals or maybe leverage deals in general, they are challenging at times to issue an opinion. So what's the result and what do we have to do if tax counsel can't deliver an opinion? We have to look at the ruling process. The IRS ruling process historically has been one that was used quite extensively. And then over time, it had deteriorated because the timing of rulings had become longer and longer. 6 to 8 months was not uncommon for a spinoff ruling. Joe and I have had rulings that were very complicated in there that go 12 months or more in the context of a deal that may not work very well. And the IRS actually heard the feedback. They listened to us, the taxpayers and taxpayer representatives, and they developed a program that's referred to as a fast track program. Right now, it's on a temporary basis, but it seems that it's going very well. It's a 12-week ruling process from when that ruling that ruling request is assigned to the appropriate IRS docket attorney. It's really been a great program for all of us. There's been a lot of usage of it, and it's been very effective. And they've even come out with areas that in the past were difficult ruling areas that they're willing to entertain in this expedited type fashion. One example that has come up regularly is the pre-revenue spinoff. So a SpinCo or even a distributing that is pre-revenue and therefore doesn't necessarily pass the historic active trader business test. If, to take a step back, a distributing company and a SpinCo need to have an active trader business. Active was not interpreted under historical guidance or was interpreted as meaning having some form of revenue. That guidance was taken away as the IRS was willing to give rulings in that context, but now they're willing to give it even out of the traditional ruling process, but in the fast track program. That just gives you an example of the IRS's willingness to really move taxpayers through that process. So it's been a very valuable tool. That being said, many public deals are done on opinion and still are executed that way and for timing purposes or other purposes as well. So again, that's a discussion that needs to take place in light of all the facts of a particular transaction. Pivoting for a moment, in an area that's important, fast track is limited to domestic issues. That doesn't mean that you can't have a cross-border spinoff that's in the fast track program. It just can't be an issue that's being ruled upon or a issue that is challenging to the transaction, if you will. So that's important because let's turn a bit to some of the things we're seeing in the cross-border space that might knock you out and that we deal with quite regularly as well. One area we're seeing a lot of activity, and it's really, really important to know, is a non-US distributing company. Normally you would think, well, why would I need US tax advice if I'm a non-US company engaging in a spinoff? The answer is because it can affect, if you have a significant US shareholder base, it can affect that group of constituent shareholders. So very important to think about that. We're seeing a lot in that area, and we're seeing a lot both in the opinion area as well as in the ruling area. I would say in that context, it's more likely, it's slightly to see more opinions if we look back historically, but again, it's one that depends on the facts. The other area we're seeing a lot of activity in that you would have thought post tax reform that, look, I don't need to really be that concerned about EMP and the like because I have the GILTI regime that has come in, still have the CFC regime, but it has importance still in the modern era of knowing how EMP is allocated between distributing and controlled. And of course, whether there is any gain recognition with respect to the allocation cross-border in the context of the spinoff. Finally, just to wrap up the cross-border space, an area that will be the subject of an upcoming Weil Tax Insight series, which is reverse Morris Trust, which is where a company is engaged in a spinoff and then subsequently merges the spinco with an acquirer, if you will. That, in the context of a cross-border transaction, we see a lot of U.S. companies distributing U.S. spincos and then combining with a foreign company. That is colloquially referred to as a spin version. And it introduces all of the spinoff issues that can prop up, whether that looks like a device for the bailout of earnings and profits. It also it has all the anti-inversion rules, which in our world are both 7874 and 367, which affect both the shareholder and the company on a go-forward basis. It does all of that. All of those issues swirling around do make it difficult to execute. They are being considered in limited circumstances, are being done. But again, for all of us, should know that those are out there. Well, Joe, I'd like to say thanks for joining us today, and thanks to everyone listening in. Again, thank you for Chambers and the Chambers Expert Focus program. We're very happy that Weil has been able to participate through the Weil Tax Insight series, and we'll be coming back to you in about a month's time with a new topic. Thank you again.
Thanks much. Take care.